I remember working nights at a convenience store. I started working there in the 90s. Shortly before working there, the owner's son worked the evening shifts. One night, a man frantically rushed in to ask for a knife. He'd been in a car accident, and his girlfriend couldn't take her seatbelt off. The owner's son turned around to grab the bagel knife, and by the time he turned back, the dude was dead on the floor. It turns out that his seatbelt had done something to his esophagus. Crushed it, I believe. And while adrenaline helped, he suffocated and died right then and there at the register. I didn't know this when I started working there. I later found out after I asked about the things I was experiencing. Here are some of the things that happened while working nights at the convenience store. First, I'd get kicked or poked in the leg or shoulder while nobody was behind me. I'd walk through cold patches that moved throughout the store. There were times I would see the reflection of someone in the cooler door, but when I quickly turned around, there would be nobody there. Countless of times, I felt as if I was being watched while I was in the cooler filling sodas. But it all came back to the knife. The bagel knife. While working by myself on camera, with nobody else there, that knife would be gone the minute I turned around. And then I'd find it back a bit later, sometimes at the exact spot where I left it, or somewhere else. My coworkers there said similar things were happening to them. The overnight shift would have one person working, and often the store was empty. There would be a couple of coworkers who would alternate turns taking the late shift. With everything that took place, I declined to take the overnight shifts. The people who worked that shift sometimes heard whistling, but mostly they heard crying. It turns out the girlfriend was a teacher at my high school. I started talking to him while I worked. I let him know that she was okay. She survived, and that he could let it go. And after a while, things started to calm down. I stopped getting poked, and the knife stayed where I left it. Definitely the most intense experience I've ever had. I grew up in a rural part of Maryland, the kind of place where everyone knows everyone within 10 square miles, and it took 30 minutes to get to the nearest department store. Our house was positioned between a cornfield and a forest. The road leading to my house was about 6 miles long, and the only people who ever drove down it were the handful of people that lived back there, and the occasional archaeological van that would do digs in the plot next to our house when the farmers would turn the fields over. We had a few paranormal experiences in that house. I'll briefly mention a few of those before telling you the story behind the title of this post. One day, I was in my room upstairs playing piano when I heard a loud bang on the wall outside my room. My parents said something like, "What the hell was that?" And when I walked out the room to ask the same thing, my piano started playing the pre-installed demo songs completely unprompted. It freaked all of us out enough that we called my brother, who was in college at the time, to tell him about it. And years later, he let us know that when we called him that night, he heard a deep laugh in the background of the phone call and was too afraid to tell us about it at the time. Another odd occurrence was when I was sitting in the sunroom and watching my brother walking through the front yard toward the door. I turned and investigated the living room, only to see my actual brother sitting on the couch wearing a different shirt than the doppelganger that walked by the window. My parents would also hear me talking in the house pretty frequently when they knew I wasn't home. Anyways, while in the 8th grade, I had this witch experience that I haven't been able to shake, and I had other people with me. My friend's dad was driving me home in his three-seater truck with my friend sitting between us. We got to the stretch of road where we could see my house across the field. The view of my house was clear because they planted soybeans that year, so the corn wasn't there blocking our view. In the ditch right by the road was a figure I could only describe as a witch. We all saw her up to the point when we drove right past her. The ditch lining the road was about 2 feet deep and somewhat overgrown, and we could only see the upper half of her body, as if she were sitting cross-legged in the ditch. She was wearing an off-white nightgown that was stained brown, and her hair was black and tangled. She was looking up into the sky with her arms extended towards the sky, and she was rocking in a circular motion. I know it sounds freaking ridiculous, but all three of us were totally uncomfortable. My friend's dad was a rough around the edges carpenter, no bullshit kind of guy. I remember feeling really scared when he asked us, What the hell was that? She didn't look like a homeless person or a drug addict, and we were so far from any town, we literally never had a single person in the 20 years I lived there wander into our area who didn't belong there. She legit looked like she came from another time and was sitting in our ditch trying to summon a freaking tornado. When we got home, my friend's dad walked us inside, which he normally didn't do because my parents didn't socialize with my friend's parents. He told my parents what we had seen, and we couldn't see her from our house, so we called the police just in case it was someone in need of psychiatric help. My friend and his dad left after a couple of minutes, and the police came about 20 minutes later and said they didn't see anyone in the ditch and couldn't find anyone walking in the fields or roads in the surrounding area. My friend's dad called us once they got home and said that by the time they drove by the spot on their way home, she was gone. I truly cannot explain it. My dad's friend has since passed, but my friend says they still talk about it every now and then in the years following. Edit. I think I got caught up in the rhyme witch and ditch. I don't know what to call her. I don't know what I saw, which is why I'm posting here. I didn't mean to insult witches. Also, for those who think I just saw a wandering person, besides it not making geographical sense, I didn't emphasize enough just how otherworldly she felt, because frankly, I don't know how to describe it. It was the way she moved, the way she didn't even glance at the car. It was a feeling beyond ominous. She looked like she came from another plane of reality. I decided to drive to the largest forest in my country in hopes of getting back in touch with nature. I needed to clear my head. I asked the local forestry office about the best place for a quick walk off the main trails. I was directed to this picturesque spot a little ways down the road. No reception. With the rare bit of blue sky we get in the UK, I was glad I made the spontaneous trip. And as I walked further down the path, I saw the clearing in the trees to my right. Since the plan was to get closer to nature, I ventured into the trees off the beaten path. It was great. I explored the area and listened to the birds as they swooped from branch to branch. I even got a good 5 minutes of meditation in, before I heard what sounded like two animals fighting. I assumed they were just foxes, and moved on. I unexpectedly reached this sand road as I emerged from the trees, but decided to walk along it for a moment as I scanned for an entry into the forest on the other side of the road. But as I looked around, I spotted a bra dangling from a bush near the road. Now, I'm aware people go into the forest for all sorts of reasons, but this did put me slightly on edge. As I turned around, I heard an electric car making its way up the road. By the time I heard the noise, it was less than 300 yards away. My instincts told me to hide or just avoid being seen, but there was no time. So I simply gave a polite nod as he passed and made my way in the opposite direction. He parks up behind me, just out of view. I began to make my way away from the road, intending to go explore further. But when I saw the car, for a moment, doing a 180 turn and then parking again, something told me to turn around and go back the way I came. As I made my way back onto the road, I spot this man in a white shirt behind the bush the bra was hanging from. He was going in the direction I just changed course from. I crossed the road and made my way back into the forest I had arrived on the sand road from. When I got slightly further in, I turned around to check if the man continued in the opposite direction. But he didn't. Instead, I see he has also crossed the road and is making his way into the part of the woods I entered. By this point, I knew I was being followed. There is no way he coincidentally went one way, then turned to head into this part of the forest that I entered. But I kept my pace brisk rather than running. My physical health can go south quickly. My knees are brittle and my ankles are weak. So, rushing could cost me, especially since I had to reach my car and drive away. As I traveled further, he was always following. I was cursing my luck as I made my way to the end of that section of the forest, just before the path that was after a large patch of grass and shrubbery. But, as I looked back, I couldn't see him. I stopped for longer than I should have, scanning the trees and listening intently. But I heard nothing, and I saw nothing. I made my way back onto the path with some relief and turned one last time to check the tree line. When I saw that he wasn't there, I began considering that perhaps I was overthinking the whole situation. But just as those thoughts crossed my mind, I saw the man emerge from the opposite side from where he was before, at the edge of the tree line. He just stared at me, but I wasn't going to take any more chances, so I made my way down the path and back to my car. I made sure to get out of there quickly, as I knew he would have to head down the same tight country road. I reported the man to the forestry office, but there wasn't much they could do. So that was it. When I paused at the tree line, I couldn't see him. For him to emerge from where he did, when I had made it back to the path, he had to have approached from another angle. An angle that I admittedly wasn't checking. But I'm glad I never went further into the forest. I'm glad I followed my instincts. Otherwise, the only way back would have been through him. And God knows what his intentions were. I never put much thought into the dark side of things. However, as time passed, the inexplicable incidents have slowly piled up. In case there is curiosity, I am 14 and a male. I am here to just tell you what has happened to me. I admit that all this might have been my imagination. There is no way I can prove anything. Well, maybe one event where I have a recording of something. I'll get to that later. First, I remember living in an apartment complex near a shopping center. I used to love that place because my mom and I would go to the mall for a walk almost every day. At the very least, she would get me yogurt. I mention the mall because I lived in that apartment until the age of 5. So there aren't many things I remember about it, except going to the mall and a couple of incidents at night. My apartment had a living room, a kitchen, a little room that led to a big closet, the bathroom, and the lone bedroom in our place. My mom, grandma, and I would sleep in the bedroom. From the position of my bed, I had a view of the mirror and sink at the end of the little room. I recall one night when we were all asleep, I woke up to the sound of someone talking. It sounded like a guy's voice coming from the living room. I sat up and noticed that both my mom and grandma remained asleep. I looked up at the red digital clock. 2:30 a.m. I decided to get up and slowly move towards the living room. I went towards the doorway that led to the living room and kitchen. Through the darkness of the room, I saw no one there. Everything was completely quiet. And even though nothing seemed out of the ordinary, I felt very cold. After a minute of looking around and listening, I decided to go back to bed, take a drink of the water close to my car bed, and go back to sleep. Shortly after, I moved into a townhouse one city over. I like the current place I'm living in, mostly because it's bigger and has a little patio. One day when I was 10, I was in my parents' room just lying down on their big bed while playing with my tablet. Unlike the previous place I lived in, the bed in this room was positioned sideways from the door, where it instead faced a window on the second floor. Outside the room is a small hallway, where my own room is on the other side, the bathroom is next to the left of my parents' room, and another room at the end of the hallway. To the right leads to the downstairs leading to the living room. So, there I was, just chilling in the early afternoon, when suddenly I had a side view of a head peering over to look at me from the right side of the doorway in the hallway. I just laughed and said, "I can see you." Sometimes my dad would do this by peering in and would often take a picture of me and then send it to me via text. This time around, there was no noise like the carpeted floor creaking from someone walking in the hallway. I then decided to get a small pillow and throw it into the hallway. There was silence after the pillow landed on the floor. After another minute, I got up to check if someone was there in the hallway. I then went downstairs where I found my mom and little brother sitting down while doing homework in the living room. I asked Mom if Dad was home, that I saw him in the hallway trying to peek in. She just tilted her head before shaking it. "No, he's still working." At that moment, I got a little cold like the night I went to the living room to check out the voice. I swear I saw someone look into the room I was in. I distinctly remember seeing a face with eyes hovering around the height of my dad. It was there looking in, and then disappeared to the right. "Did you go upstairs just now?" I asked. Mom just shook her head without looking up at me. My dad came home a couple of hours later. This other occasion happened at night. My parents, my little brother, and I were in their room just talking. I was sitting in the middle of the bed just laying myself on the wall. Everyone else was surrounding me. From my position, I directly had a view of the hallway. I even noticed that the door to my room was open with the lights on. As we were laughing at a video we just saw, I casually looked up. I saw a tall black figure glide from right to left. My smile disappeared as I kept staring into the hallway. My dad asked what was wrong. I just shook my head and said how I thought I saw someone in the hallway. He kept looking at the hallway as he got up. He looked back at me to confirm that I wasn't kidding. My dad went to the hallway, checked the bathroom and the other rooms, and found nothing. I told everyone that it must have been my imagination. The only thing I noticed about the gliding black figure was that it had no definable shape, and that it was very tall. I was staying in Vancouver, traveling with my little sister. I was in my late 20s, her in her early 20s. It was summer and the weather was freaking gorgeous. We were walking down Robson Street when this encounter happened. After stopping at a cannabis dispensary to buy some pre-rolls, the two of us parked ourselves on the sidewalk. We were close to our hotel, and we knew that once we were in our room, there'd be an arduous elevator ride between us and our addiction. So we were planning to stand around a while and chain smoke, people watching, until we'd had our fill of both. I've got my lighter in my hand, a joint dangling from my lower lip, but I haven't ignited it yet. Wait, before I continue, I may have to describe this lighter to you, because it might actually matter, in some terrifying, symbolic way. I just bought it in anticipation of these pre-rolls, from a place called Dank Mart, maybe a half hour before meeting the man I believed to be the devil. The lighter had a Keith Haring print on it, often called the Three-Eyed Monster. Now here's an explanation I just recklessly cut and paste from Google. The smiley face is another frequently used character found in many of Keith Haring's works. This icon, the three-eyed face, is a mysterious figure often associated with greed and excess. Alternatively, this character has been used to represent the unknown. Okay, back to my story. Like I said, I've got my lighter in hand, a joint dangling from my lower lip, but I haven't ignited it yet. The exact moment I was about to flick the flame, I saw a suited man bursting out of the Five Guys restaurant we were standing in front of. My first thought from the moment I saw him was, why was he in there? He doesn't even eat? When I recalled having that bizarre nonsense thought later on, while safe in our hotel room, it made my skin feel cold all over. The suited man acknowledged no one as he stormed out of the burger joint. He simply raised one hand high, as if hailing no taxi in particular, and demanded, "Lighter." This aloof behavior was kind of bemusing to me, so I waved at the suited man to catch his attention, offering the service of my lighter. He walked towards us slowly, without a verbal or gestural response of any kind, and the two of us instantly began to recoil from him. His suit was meticulous. I've never seen a fabric exactly like it. It was a dark blue color, with thin silver threads. A high-priced suit isn't a strange thing to see in Vancouver, but this one stood out to me, for reasons I'm unable to even articulate. The suited man stopped in front of me and said something. I don't remember what. Just a few words of relatively normal small talk, I think. I want to say he asked me, "What are you doing in the city?" But that could be just my imagination filling in what details I've now forgotten. While he spoke, I watched the suited man reach into the breast pocket of his suit and retrieve a comically short cigar stub. There was barely any cigar left to smoke, and he hadn't even cut the ash from the tip. Somehow, this last detail didn't seem to produce any mess whatsoever. The suited man took my lighter and lit his cigar stub effortlessly, like it was only a cigarette. Not once had he glanced at my little sister so far, who was standing directly beside me. That registered as odd to me at this point. Really odd. After inhaling from his cigar stub, the suited man looked over my lighter for a long moment, as if contemplating it, then announced, "I like this." His eyes didn't seem pleased though. I could tell he was about as impressed by Keith Haring's artwork as I was. "How much do you want for it?" the suited man asked. "It's just a lighter, mate," I told him, shrugging. Like I alluded to above, I don't like Keith Haring all that much, and I didn't mind the idea of parting with the lighter. We had other lighters in our hotel room anyway. It was just a purchase of convenience. No big deal. Take it, I offered. The suited man ignored me and reached into his pocket to retrieve his wallet. By then, he's suddenly counting hundreds out loud, his fingers flicking through the bills in a spidery way that was unsettling to watch. 100, 200, 3, 4. What the hell's going on? It took us a long moment to even realize that this was still about the fucking lighter. I forget what I said to him. Something bewildering and non-confrontational like, "It's okay, dude." My brain was currently blue screening and attempting to catch up with this man's proposal. Now, I just wanted the suited man to put his wallet back in his pocket and walk away with the lighter. I regretted ever inviting him to approach us. There was something about standing so close to him that felt like standing on the edge of a dizzying height. He started counting much slower, emphasizing each bill as he flicked the corner into his palm. Once he counted past $1,000, my little sister blurted something out. I think it was, "You're crazy." I'm almost certain that's what she said. My little sister didn't sound amused or entertained by the situation. She sounded more shocked and weirded out. It was the voice you'd use with a creep at the bar. The suited man stared bloody daggers at her. It was terrifying. His eyes lit up with malice, and his lips peeled back for a moment in this awful, awful snarl. "We're talking," he growled at her. Just those two words, and they felt so loaded. "The men are talking," it said. Then, the suited man looked at me with reproach, like I was at fault for not having her under control, for letting the girl interrupt important business. "It's just a lighter," I repeated, sounding more like a person being mugged than someone being offered money. Instantly, I've gone from feeling deeply uncomfortable with this exchange to feeling explicitly in danger. I was mugged at knife point once before visiting Melbourne as a young man. I was scared then. Very scared, yeah, but this was a different type of fear. I've only felt this kind of terror once in my life. There was no adrenaline spike, as if all the fight or flight in me had been muffled somehow. It was like being soul-sucked by a dementor, as silly as that sounds. Every second spent even discussing this transaction was spiritually draining to the point of actual physical exhaustion. If we didn't leave now, I had a strange belief that we'd never have the strength to walk away from him. "You can have it," I insisted. "I don't need it." This was not the answer that he wanted. The suited man had already counted the entire contents of his wallet, just over $1,000. And by then, he was pulling more loose cash out from his pockets, in a weird frenzy. He started demanding that I give him a price for the lighter. Any price. He didn't seem rejected or offended, exactly. More nervous. Almost like he was panicking or something. I've had a lot of friends ask me why I didn't take the suited man's money. Some almost seemed pissed at me for not taking him up on his insane proposition. If they believe me at all, that is. The obvious answer is that I am lucky enough in life to not need to take his money. But that's not what I was thinking about that day, though. Most of the friends which I've confided the story to, I'd bet good money that they'd have turned him down too. I'd bet lighter money on that, as confidently as I bet on the integrity of their souls. Even the ones that exclaim how quickly they'd have snatched the money from his hands. By the time our exchange had concluded, I felt like the suited man was actually correct somehow, and that I had been wrong. It wasn't just the lighter. It suddenly felt inexplicably valuable. Not the lighter itself, which was already in the suited man's pocket. but the transaction now taking place. I told the suited man no one last time. Then my sister and I promptly began walking in the other direction, saying not a word to one another. But it didn't take more than a few seconds for us to register how scared the other still felt. That's when we both started jogging briskly. We made it to the hotel and then rode the elevator in total silence, both still shaken by our encounter. Once we got into our room, we started smoking in the bathroom like degenerates, and suddenly, this profound wave of giddy relief came over us, like you get when you have a near-death experience. Finally, my sister asked, "Was that man the devil?" I nodded before instantly answering, "It was the devil, or one of his associates perhaps." I recall this encounter fairly often, and when I do, I'm always surprised that I can't remember the suited man's face. There's an impression I'm left with, but when I attempt to focus my memory on it, his features begin to morph, eluding me. If I had to provide a celebrity likeness at gunpoint, I could, but I wouldn't be all that confident in doing so. I tell this overly curious gunman that he kinda looked like the character Declan from Breaking Bad. You know, that random guy who Walt demands to say his name? That exact face shape, that same style of black facial hair, but with a touch of silver in the hair, yet also slightly younger in appearance overall. That's the best I could do, and I'm not confident that my description isn't simply a byproduct of my imagination imprinting onto my memory. This is a story that feels both silly and underwhelming to tell, but it still makes me uneasy to think about it. Sometimes, I catch myself wondering if the suited man was trying to buy my sister's soul from me. This is the only unexplainable experience to ever happen to me, and I assure you, I haven't written a creative writing story since high school. I will try to tell it exactly how it happened. For context, I've always had trouble sleeping. A true night owl. But, once I fall asleep, I'm asleep and don't wake up. In fact, I usually sleep in and miss half the day. It's not a fear or anxiety thing. I just never got into the mindset to easily doze off. Even in bed, I could just spend all night watching videos on my phone or reading. And even when I was younger as a kid, I would be playing on my Game Boy. As far back as I can remember, I would just lie there looking at the ceiling, thinking about things, wide awake as usual, checking the clock every now and then, getting more annoyed as time passed by. This is still very much the case. I guess I'm just a person who can never seem to get to sleep. This story took place when I was 17. I was a high school student who preferred taking science classes. I didn't grow up religious, so basically, I was a logical type of guy who valued facts and evidence. The first incident happened when I was lying in bed, with my head propped up by two pillows, while watching YouTube videos on my phone. It was around 2:30 a.m., and it was completely normal for me to be awake at that time. I would usually fall asleep around 4 or 5 a.m., waking up past midday. It was during the school holidays when this first incident happened, which is why I could get away with waking up so late and staying up all night. So, there I was watching YouTube videos on my phone at 2:30 in the morning, when suddenly I heard someone or something take a very deep inhale. The sound of it alone was so loud and sounded so close to me that I was immediately startled. I then clutched my phone to my chest so hard that it stopped producing light and fumbled for the volume button to turn the video down, before just hitting the power button on my phone. The video played for a second more and then finally fell silent. During the time I was still hearing the deep inhale. Then there was a slight pause, and then again, as loud as can be, there was a deep exhale. It sounded slightly raspy, almost like Darth Vader, but less robotic. In fact, it wasn't machine-like at all. It just had even slower breaths, and similar in the way that you would hear the wind of every breath. The deep breaths continued, and I looked out my bedroom window, then to the foot of my bed, and all the while my phone was still firmly clutched to my chest as I'm pretty much frozen in fear, simply due to how loud, slow, and deep these breaths were. Each breath in and out lasted 2-3 full seconds each and were as loud as a breath could be without being vocalized. It was as if whatever was making the breathing sounds was going with every exhale before making a small O on its mouth with every inhale. But not gasp or vocalized noises, just breaths. My mind was racing as to what sort of animal can make these sounds. But where I live, there are no big animals at all anyway, so I reasoned maybe the vents of the air conditioner or heaters or whatever were making some sort of weird sound. But no, there's no small animal, or really any wild animal in Australia, with the lung capacity to take breaths this deep, and certainly not inside my bedroom. This heating, cooling still work fine and silent to this day, over 6 years later. And besides, there's no vent even close to my bed. All the while I was having these thoughts trying to justify the noise, I was still listening to the breaths. I kept staring at the foot of my bed, where I thought the sound was coming from. But really, the only reason I thought the sound was coming from the foot of my bed was because it was the only spot in the bedroom I couldn't see. So my brain just immediately imagined someone crouching there. I thought this just because the breathing was so loud and it sounded so close that it was, and still is, impossible to me that it wasn't coming from inside my room, from right next to me. I honestly felt it sounded even closer to me than from the foot of my bed. So, I stayed there frozen, phone still clutched to my chest, staring towards the foot of my bed, then to the closed curtains, and then back to the foot of my bed. For a few moments, I thought maybe someone might be pressing their face against my bedroom window, behind the curtains, and breathing loudly to scare me. But I ruled it out because it was simply too loud. The windows were shut and locked with curtains in front of them that would have muffled the sound far too much. This was like breathing into my ear. With each possibility I ruled out while trying to justify what was going on, I just got more fearful of the noise. I just lay there in my empty room, listening to these deep, ominous breaths, my eyes fixated on the foot of my bed, realistically probably about 3 or 4 minutes, but it felt like 15 before it just stopped. The breathing didn't really fade away, it just kind of stopped as quickly as it came. Maybe it got a tiny bit quieter for a brief moment before the sound went away entirely. Vanished with one last exhale, and I was alone again. I lay there for probably another 10 minutes without exaggeration, with my heart pounding into my ear before I calmed down enough to have the nerve to turn my phone screen back on. Even then, I just put it on my bedside table quietly and slowly, and then lay there all night. I know I sound like a wimp right now, because it's just breathing, but it was honestly just that much of a whack experience. And then it happened again. About 4 months later, at a similar time of night, maybe 3 a.m., again, it went on for about 4 minutes, slightly longer than the first time I believe, and I reacted the exact same way. The deepest, loudest, breathiest breaths I've ever heard, sounding like it's coming from within my bedroom, like a huge man was standing right over me, right at the foot of my bed, or even closer right next to it. But of course, there was nothing and no one around. I've never been able to justify what happened at all. I know it seems like nothing because it's just breathing, but all these years later, I got goosebumps just typing this out. When trying to reenact it to my friends or other people, I couldn't and still cannot make breaths as loud and as deep, and I'm an adult male. Only something with a huge lung capacity could possibly, maybe a huge man. I imagine maybe a giant football player, but that's it. When you try to draw out a breath for a long time, they get quieter. If you try to breathe loudly, your breaths get shorter. These breaths are both loud and long. I also want to note that at the time, I wasn't doing any drugs, and I've never been on any sort of medication. Since then, I've even had sleep paralysis, and done psychedelics and recreational drugs a fair amount. I've taken high doses of acid and smoked a lot of weed, and I've never had any sort of delusions or psychosis at all, ever. This certainly wasn't sleep paralysis either. I wasn't asleep, and there was no paralysis. Sure, I was frozen in fear as I felt vulnerable lying in bed in my underwear, but both times I fumbled shutting my phone off, clutching it to my chest. Both times I was looking around my room, turning my head back and forth frantically. People who have experienced sleep paralysis know that you are truly paralyzed and can't move at all during the experience, and then you wake up from it. I can remember everything before the events, during, and after. Everything was crystal clear. It never happened again after those 2 times. And it is the only thing in my entire life that I truly cannot justify or explain. And I feel like I've thought of everything. Perhaps some animal in the vents having its breathing echoed and amplified? Some weird problem with the vent itself? Someone outside my window trying to scare me? Someone outside my door? In my closet? All of these I ruled out as impossible. I know I've said this a lot, but the breaths were just too loud and organic. And despite there being uniformly slow, deep breaths, there was definitely a slight human sound to it, irregularity to them, in volume and in rhythm, which was just terrifying. The fraction of a second pause in between the breaths in and out was the scariest part for some reason, lying there, anticipating the next breath. None of it makes sense. The only way I can describe it is that it sounded like a giant man with an insane lung capacity, standing right over me, looking down at me, taking the deepest, slowest, loudest breaths that he could muster for 4 minutes before suddenly disappearing into nothing. And then I was alone in bed again, scared out of my mind. This may seem like not much since it's just noise, compared to other people's stories, but I assure you that this story is true and not exaggerated. I tried to describe it as accurately as possible. I've told this story a million times to people whenever paranormal stuff comes up in conversation. And it only makes it scarier to me that I experienced sleep paralysis and drugs, because it just makes me more certain that this was real life. I know it was, and it happened twice. Experience as sober as a judge, wide awake, and calm at the time, of course, before the breathing scared the crap out of me. This will sound trite and corny, but yes, I'm still afraid to hear it again. And this will also sound corny, but I've been in real dangerous situations before, and never been half as scared as the pure dread and vulnerability I felt those 2 nights, for those few minutes, for the rest of the night lying there after it ended. It was truly messed up. As I said, I'm not religious, non-superstitious, and at the time it happened, I was even less so, but I kinda believe this thing was a damn ghoul. At the time I was 17 and living in Denver. It was during the summer that this event took place at my parents' cabin in rural Colorado outside of Estes Park in a wooden area with the nearest people being 7 miles north. As a teenager that had nothing to do, my mom encouraged me to drive out to an underused cabin in the countryside of Colorado. Before I left, my girlfriend texted that she wanted to come over to my house, so I invited her to the summer home. We brought 2 cars, my girlfriend's minivan and my Ram. We spent time walking outside or watching TV and such. By the time 6 p.m. rolled around, I decided to stay the night, and my girlfriend was going to leave in a few minutes. So I told her, "You can leave whenever, but right now I'm going to grab pillows from my truck." The cars had to be parked a quarter mile from the house, so I began my walk to the car, grabbed my pillows, walked back, only to find my girlfriend absolutely distraught. She was walking towards the door a minute after I left to catch up to me, when at the door, she told me I heard a light scratch. Then apparently, she heard in my voice, "Hey, open the door and let me in." Luckily, my girlfriend is very paranoid and decided to look through the window to see me walking down the road, oblivious, with nobody at the door. I'm confident that neither one of us were under the influence, and we were both sober. But that was only the first of 2 encounters. Both of us were freaked out by this, so we closed the windows and doors and slept through the night completely fine. She left quickly at around 8 a.m., and I was left alone. I decided to stay because I was actually enjoying the freedom of being alone until it came to an end when I returned to the cabin. After entering, I crossed a large room to sit on the couch, when I shit you not, I heard my girlfriend at the door sounding distraught, saying, "Open the door, oh please, please open the damn door," accompanied by scraping sounds on the concrete path. I called out and said, "What the hell's going on?" And I heard her reply in my own voice, "Open the door, don't be a fool." I locked myself in the bathroom and called my dad to come over. I stayed in the bathroom until he got to the cabin, and I told him everything. I don't know if he believed me, but the next day, we left immediately. A few years ago, I was camping with some friends in East Tennessee. This was a lesser known campsite that is not very well marked. There was a road crossing a creek, and on the right side, there was a single campsite where we were staying at. And on the left side, there was a string of maybe 4 campsites following down the creek. The road was on higher ground, so you would have to make your way down on a hill on either side. About 1:30 a.m., 2 big pickup trucks pulled up and set up at the first campsite across the road. We all thought it was really strange that people would be getting here so late. After taking up some time unloading, they got a huge fire burning and had a very bright light that lit up their whole area. They also had like a small, tall stand-up tent, like some type of pop-up changing privacy room. This is where it started to get weird, and my memory is not completely reliable because alcohol was involved. But it looked like to me like they had some type of weird outfit on, like robes or jackets or some other clothing of importance. Maybe purple or dark blue in color? They kept going in and out of the tent while others were moving about and around the fire. It was so bizarre to us that we couldn't help peering over at them every so often to see what they were doing. Whatever it was, it seemed ritualistic. Not saying it was a crazy cult or anything, but that's what we thought at the time. None of it made sense to us. They should have known that there were other people around because of the cars, so secrecy obviously wasn't a concern of theirs. Whatever they were doing, it wasn't a typical relaxing by a campfire while making s'mores kind of camping. They were definitely doing something, and they were there all night doing it. I saw them leave early in the morning, but didn't notice anything crazy. I do remember they had several trash bags in the back of their trucks. My only normal explanation is that maybe they were doing some type of volunteer trash cleanup, team building, hazing, or some type of biological study. Has anyone ever witnessed something like this? Or has any ideas what this could have been? Back around 2010, I was looking to purchase a house. After years of renting, I figured it was time to finally get a home of my own. With the realtor I met at work as a customer of mine, we visited many prospective houses. The ones I saw were either too small or too big and therefore out of my price range. After a while, I settled on a modest 3-bedroom house in Southgate. I received an address from my realtor as I was driving home from a long day at work. He urged me to check it out that very day so I can decide quickly on putting down an offer. I relented and drove over there. This gated house gave me a good feeling from the moment I saw it from afar. The house was a golden brown color along with a trim lawn and flowers growing on each side of the porch. I accessed the front gate and decided to walk through the driveway towards the garage and into the backyard. There was a large tree almost reaching the roof of the garage. I stood there for a moment and just listened. The wind and leaves moving pushed me into getting my phone and asking my realtor to come over as soon as possible so I could look inside and make an offer. The house inside looked new as expected. There is a white fall fireplace in the living room that caught my eye. After looking over the dining room and kitchen, I walked towards the bathroom. As I stood just outside looking into the bathroom, I noticed that I was in a hallway where there was a door to my right and another on the left. With the left door being the farthest, I headed towards there. Upon opening the door, I was greeted by a window that had a full view of the backyard with the tree as the centerpiece. I knew I wanted this room to be mine. After taking another moment to admire the view, I turned around and told the realtor to make the offer that very day. Not long after, my mom and I moved in. I recalled getting such a late start moving in that day that we decided to spend the night, even though we didn't have our beds there yet. The next morning, while opening some boxes, I noticed my mom looking unsettled. After asking her what was wrong, she looked at me and half whispered, "Hey, were you able to sleep well last night?" I smiled, already guessing that lying on a carpeted floor was not all that comfortable. I mentioned how I was able to sleep alright with my blanket and pillow. My mom paused and then continued, "Yeah, me too. I finally got comfortable by laying my head down on my pillow, but as I was about to drift into sleep, I felt something push my head forcefully into the floor. I quickly got up and looked around. I was alone." I felt a cold chill run through my back as I heard that. She mentioned that she turned on the lights and tried to go back to sleep after that. "Maybe it was a dream where you felt a sort of falling sensation," I told her. That seemed to calm her down, and then we continued the day moving our stuff in. Again, these encounters happened to my mom. For context, I placed a small 32-inch black TV in front of the fall fireplace, and next to it, a wooden small foldable table to hold my Xbox 360. Back then, I enjoyed playing Left 4 Dead 2, as well as the Resident Evil games. On an early evening, I was working while my mom was at home doing laundry. She went into my room to drop off some clean clothes on my bed. As she was walking towards her room, out of the corner of her eye, she was able to spot the living room, specifically the TV and how it contrasted with the white fireplace wall. She suddenly stopped and peered directly at the TV. When I came home, she told me that she could have sworn she momentarily saw an old lady with a white gown right next to the TV behind the console. But when she looked, nothing was there. I replied that it must have been the white console, along with the firewall, that made it seem as if she saw something more. After momentarily looking up at the ceiling, she agreed, and we both never paid any extra thought into it. Next, after a couple of weeks later, on a Saturday night, I went out with a couple of coworkers. About 11:30 p.m., my phone vibrated and noticed it was my mom. She knew I was out and about and would never call unless it was an emergency. So, I answered the call, and my mom was panicked. I saw her again. I was walking out of the bathroom towards the kitchen when I saw that same old lady in white by the TV. Could you please come back home? Please get here. I felt my heart drop into my stomach as I heard the labored breathing between her words. I was at a bar at the time and said my goodbyes to my friends before heading back. About half an hour later, I entered through the back door and found Mom standing close by with her back against the wall. All she could do was point towards the living room. I slowly made my way there and saw nothing out of the ordinary. But as I walked towards the TV and console, I felt a sudden unease that made me look over my shoulders. I sensed a sudden jolt of cold cascading all over my back. I turned around and invited my mom to have a late night bite away from the house. The next strange incident, which happened to me, took place on a cool Friday night in May of 2012. I decided to stay home and spend time with my mom. After dinner, she suggested we see a movie. With no interesting movies on TV, I reminded her that I have the film What Lies Beneath on DVD. We must have watched that film at least 5 times. I have always been fascinated with the paranormal films, and this one film made me feel disconcerted at times. Naturally, my mom became ecstatic at the movie choice. I then searched my entire room and couldn't find it. I then went to my car by going through the kitchen exit, where I had to open a white interior door, followed by a black metal door. After searching, the DVD was not in my car. As I came back inside, I closed the black door and entered the living room, visibly frustrated. As I gave the bad news to Mom, I sat down on the couch, right next to her, and stared at the TV. At that exact moment, I swear I saw someone peer in from the open kitchen white door. I quickly sprang up and stared at the door. I told Mom that I saw someone peer in their head to watch us. I went directly to the kitchen door and confirmed that the black metal door was locked. About a month later, my mom left to visit family abroad and left the house all to myself. There were nights where I could come home at night ranging from 9 p.m. to 12 a.m. I would enter my house from that back door that led to the kitchen. Every single time I would come into the kitchen, I felt as if something was watching me from the dark living room. Feeling the chills, I would not look towards the living room. Instead, I would reach over to the light switch and flip it on, and then rush to my room. I told my brother about this feeling, and within a week, came over to keep me company. I would come home to the lights on with the smell of burnt food from my brother's cooking. There would be nights where we'd stay up late watching movies, in the dark. One night around 2:30 in the morning, I turned on the lights in the living room. After turning off the TV, I turned around to face my brother and began discussing the movie we just watched. He was standing in front of the hallway that led to my mom's room to the right, the bathroom towards the center right, and my room on the left. I took my eyes off my brother to look at my phone, and as soon as I looked up at him, a black shadow sprinted from left to right, towards my mom's room. I just pointed behind him, not saying a word. I just saw something, I finally stammered. My brother just looked behind him and went towards the semi-dark hallway. He went towards Mom's room and grabbed the doorknob. It was locked. He just looked back at me and shook his head. We promptly said goodnight to each other and quickly went to our own rooms. One last incident that happened while living at that house took place on the night when my brother needed to go to see his daughter near the city of Riverside. He left around 7 p.m. and mentioned he would be returning later that night. It must have been 11:30 when I got up from the couch to go pee. As I was doing my business, I sighed and stared forward, focusing on the white wall just above the toilet. Everything was silent, until so suddenly there was a loud bang behind the wall. What horrified me so much was that on the other side of that wall was my room. I ran to my room, and after flipping on the lights, I noticed that it was empty. Who banged the wall? It had to be my brother, trying to prank me. I went into the living room and called him. After a few rings, he picked up. "Hey, are you already here?" I asked. After a few seconds of silence, my brother quietly responded, "I just left Riverside. I should be there in 2 hours." After telling him to hurry home, I got the hell out of the living room and locked myself in my room.